Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this CFA presentation entitled Fire Safety Essentials. My name is Raj Samrai, and I will be taking you on this journey of information to allow you to be better prepared for the fire season ahead. As is traditional in this circumstance, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we are hosting this meeting today, and of course pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and of course any other Aboriginal people that are here today. Without further ado, I would like to first of all introduce you to the technology that we are using today. And don't be afraid of this technology. It's very easy to use and it allows for good engagement. And that's what this presentation is all about. It's an online presentation. At the moment, you cannot see me. Sorry, at the moment you can see me, but I cannot see you. The way that you communicate with me is through two means. One of them is by using the chat function. And the chat function is an icon that will appear at the bottom of your screen. And the way to access the chat function is to just scan your mouse icon over it, and it will allow you to offer a comment by way of chat that I can see, other attendees can also see, and any of our panelists can also see. Feel free to ask questions as we proceed through the presentation. And this is the strength of this presentation. I need to also let you know that this presentation is being recorded, and it's purely being recorded for my purposes, for my own personal feedback, for my own self-development. I must emphasize to you that we are presenting a presentation that really is the entry-level information. It's fire safety essentials. We will not be going into the complex nature of fire and weather patterns and the like, but we'll be giving you an introductory level of information that allow you to be better prepared in the event of a bad fire day. I'm passionate about this environment. I'm actually extremely passionate about keeping our communities safe during times of critical danger, and fire is one such situation. We talk about risk mitigation. We're here to mitigate that risk, move you away out of harm's way. The second means of communicating is that periodically I will be launching polls. And these polls will be at intervals throughout the presentation. So for the next sort of hour to hour and a half, we'll be discussing various elements of fire and fire behaviour. And during this time, the polls will be released. What do the polls actually look like? Well, let's have a practice. Before we do that, let's have a practice around the chat function. Just drop into the chat, now that you know how it works, drop into the chat just how, well, first of all, where are you calling me from? Where am I seeing you from? I can see that we've got a number of participants in our viewing today and watching this Fire Safety Essentials from Lavers Hill. So I've got Joy Witten from Johanna. Welcome, Joy. Thank you for attending this morning's presentation. So where else are people joining me from this morning? Now, interestingly, don't be afraid to use the chat function. It's totally anonymous. You know, in terms of, yes, it's not anonymous, sorry, but we do understand that this can be difficult for some people. Serena and Cam from Lavers Hill, thank you very much for joining. What I'd like to do now is just to settle the situation down a bit, is to go into that second level of interaction that we're going to be using today, and that's called the polling function. I'm going to launch our first poll. It will appear on your screen. You should see it now. So you have a series of questions there, and I call these feedback questions, or information about the audience that are joining me today. How long have you lived in the area? Have you ever been to a CFA meeting before? How did you find out about this session? And finally, where do you sit in terms of your knowledge around fire and fire behaviour? And again, it's very straightforward to answer these responses. Just put your icon over the appropriate, appropriate response that you want to see. And that way, I'm now going to end the polling and share those results with you. Now, as you can see from the shared results, it's an equal split between, we've got some members of our viewers that have been in the area for quite some time, 10 plus years, but the majority are relatively new to this environment. The majority have not been to a CFA meeting before. In fact, 2/3 have not been to a CFA meeting before. And this is new for the CFA too. We're venturing into this online space to be able to get a level of interaction, particularly during these difficult times of COVID-19. And how did you find out about this session? A newspaper advertisement, a community notice board? Well, there you go. And we're going to be talking about communication, and particularly communication as it relates to fires very shortly. So that'll be a great way of knowing the way we all draw information. And of course, rating your knowledge around fire, the majority of us sit in that very low to medium knowledge around fire. So I'm going to stop sharing those results. And what I'd like you to do, just cross out of your poll as well on your screen if it's still appearing. Okay, thank you very much for your feedback there. What are the learning objectives today? Well, first and foremost, it's not going to be death by PowerPoint. That's not the idea. This is about engagement. This is about getting the messages over to you in a very clear and concise manner. Of course, the chat function is open to you should you wish to raise any questions or concerns or any comments that you're not sure about or anything that you want further clarity about. Use the chat function. I will be monitoring the chat as we proceed through this presentation. So please feel free to use it, and it'll be for other people's benefit as well. Okay, what are you going to learn? We're going to get underneath the skin of fire, okay? We're going to really get from the basics right through to modern day thoughts around fire, and basically prepare you with a level of knowledge that will keep you safe during this time period. We can talk about some of the expectations around fire. What is it that makes fires so horrible? We're going to talk about, the communications of it. How do you know if there's a fire in your locality, and how do you respond? The all-important planning and decision-making process. It's quite crucial that you take on board that the CFA are strong advocates for leaving early and making a plan, having a fire plan, sticking to that plan and leaving early. And of course, the best laid plans can fail. And this is why we always suggest plans B, C, D, and E. So moving on. When we talk about understanding fire risk, what do we mean? Well, this fire safety essentials, first of all, is tailored specifically for the area of Lavers Hill and the surrounding environment. Lavers Hill, as you all know, is located in the municipality of Colac-Otway, and it caters well for tourists, featuring a number of cafes, a pub with a bistro, and tourist information as well. The landmark wood sculpture at the junction of the Great Ocean Road and Colac Road is the Drift, which is a tribute to the marine environment prehistoric skeletal finds, shipwrecked at the agricultural machinery of the area, and it was designed by the artist James Cattell. Now, I'm very familiar with that particular part of the Great Ocean Road, having run the Great Ocean Road Marathon a number of times, so I know the importance of Lavers Hill and the historic value. Lavers Hill is actually located centrally on the Great Ocean Road journey in the heart of the Otway's rainforest. One thing that's for sure, and I've found this in a number of face-to-face presentations that I've done in our locality. I'm Victorian located as well in Woodford near Warrnambool. I know that and I'm also a volunteer firefighter with the local brigade in Woodford and have been for about 10 years or so. One thing that I have found is that there is a tremendous amount of community spirit that resides in this part of the world. Our communities are bonded by a sense of cohesion that's strong. And at times of danger, that community comes together, and it's that strength that underpins the activities of emergency services like the Country Fire Authority. So bear that in mind as we progress to the next slide, which is, okay, we all know, and if we didn't know, this is a very stark reminder of Victoria as one of the most bushfire-prone parts of the world. We talk a lot about California, but hey, we are no different in our vulnerability to fire. Why is this so? We have a range of landscapes, and this slide shows some of those landscapes that exist across the state. We have grassland, we have a plentiful supply of bushland, we have some mountainous forested areas as well, and of course an extensive amount of farmland. Victoria, look, you know, fire has been part of the Australian continent for millions of years and has been significant in shaping much of this landscape that I've just spoken about. Many fires were started by lightning. Aboriginal people used fire for many thousands of years to care for country, and this was a common practice. The fires were a tool that encouraged the growth and extent of grasslands to enhance farming and hunting. It allowed for the reduction in the levels of fuel, and we'll be talking about fuel load very shortly. It kept the vegetation from becoming dense and overgrown and hard to walk through. Records only really started when we talk about bushfire record keeping in about 1851 in the early stages of European settlement. So there's a bit of background for you around some of the history that's preceded and how fire has been a relevant and key player when it comes to the landscape. The map that you're seeing on your screen now depicts the different weather districts that exist across our state. Each weather district has its own level of fire risk. That's the take-home message from this. The northeast will be very different to the southwest at a particular time of our fire period. So the fire risk will be different in each different weather district. Another consideration from this particular slide is what we call the seasonal outlook. Now, the seasonal outlook describes the overall weather trend of what's happening in that particular weather district. Many of you may have heard that this fire season is actually what we call experiencing what we call the La Nina effect. So what does La Nina mean? Well, La Nina conditions are expected first and foremost, and this might be a bit of good news for us at this stage, that the La Nina conditions are expected to reduce the risk of prolonged fire activity across most of Victoria compared to last year. So if we just sort of unpick that a bit more, what does La Nina really mean? Okay, well, increased rainfall across much of Australia, that's number one. And I know that in this part of Victoria, we've certainly seen a lot of unexpectedly high rainfall at different times. That's the La Nina effect. Also, La Nina is responsible for cooler daytime temperatures, particularly south of the tropics, and that's what these two slides show, and warmer overnight temperatures in the north. The last La Nina weather phenomena happened during the winter of 2017-2018, and El Nino followed in 2018-19. So there's a duality of these two weather trends, the La Nina as opposed to the El Nino, okay? Wet as opposed to dry, okay? So what does this all mean? So what does this mean to the community members of Lavers Hill and surrounds? In order to answer that question, we need to look at what the local seasonal outlook is. Lavers Hill is located in a part of Victoria that has experienced slightly higher or above average rainfall and as a result, has above average soil moisture. So more rain, more moisture in the soil. Not rocket science. In fact, there's enough moisture in the soil to make the grass grow rapidly and grow really become quite prolific. This, coupled with the warmer temperatures, particularly when the sun comes out, we've had a few days of sort of 30 plus days, the intense drying activity of the sun, and we call this curing, when the fuel load, the grass, has cured, dried fully, there is then the potential for ignition of this large amount of fuel load that has suddenly appeared. So, in a nutshell, the combination of the rain, the rapid drying, will cause rapid grass growth, and that grass is then available as fuel in the event of fire. Needless to say, like every fire, every season, there is a need to be prepared for a fire that could result as a result of this high fuel load. Let's just talk about the local vegetation for just 1 second. Now, this is crucially important. I might just open up the chat function at the moment. If you could just tell me what type of landscape do you think you have in your area? So Lavers Hill, what's the landscape like? Is it grassy? Is it woodland? Is it forested? Is it bushland? Or is it a mixture? Where do you think, how would you describe the vegetation in your part of the world? So, Anne, I can see that you raised your hand, but it's going to be far better for you to offer a comment because I can't actually unmute you to hear you. The only way of communication is through the chat function. So any comments around? Yeah, okay, Serena, thank you. Rainforest, open paddocks. Yes, I mean, I've driven through Lavers Hill many times. I would describe it just as that. Grassland, pasture and forest nearby. A combination of grassland features very strongly. So what does this really mean? And thanks, Sam, it's a mixture of all in many blue gum plantations as well. So you've got a mixture of fuel types that could be accelerated, that could accelerate the rate of fires because of the potential for them to burn. They are, we talk about the fire triangle. We need to have fuel in there, we need to have a heat source, and we need to have oxygen. Your fuel source there is rampant, there's a lot of it. And of course, with the La Nina conditions, we'll have excessive grass growth. So I would say that the predominant fuel in the Lavers Hill area is a combination of all the ones that you've mentioned, particularly with areas of bush and bush along the roadsides as well. So if we take that into all into consideration, there is the potential for fast-moving grass fires in this area with the high likelihood of ember attack. And when we talk about embers, I'll be explaining more to you about embers shortly. But with the blue gum plantation that Anne mentioned, and also the forest nearby that Joy mentioned, they are potential what we call ember traps. Embers could be trapped in those plantations and be a source of what we call canopy fires. Fires that occur at high level above the forest plantations, which can then spread very, very rapidly. And how's the spread caused? Well, first and foremost, rapid moving or fast moving grass fires are going to be the order of the day this fire season. This is going to be accelerated by the wind. The wind is the driving force when it comes to fire direction. A change of wind direction will cause a change of fire direction. So the fire front would move in a different direction dependent on that wind. When we talk about the topography, and when we say topography, we mean the lay of the land, the hills, the climbs and the rises. Fire behaves very differently when it comes to these undulations in the landscape. Fire will move far more rapidly uphill than downhill. As a rule of thumb, for every 10-degree rise in inclination, a fire will double in speed. So a lot of folks become quite complacent when they say, oh, there's a couple of hills separating me and the fire. I'll have time to leave. In actual fact, those hills will accelerate the rate at which the fire will get to you. And if you couple that with a strong wind, it's a recipe for a fire reaching you far quicker than you might think. Let's now go into another layer of a local vegetation, which is the local risks. You know, when we talk about our area, Lavers Hill, what is it about our neighbourhood that you think make it an area of local risk? What are some of the elements that you think would actually make it difficult for you to leave in the event of a fire? So again, I'm going to launch a poll at this stage for us to really get underneath the skin of fire. And the way I'm going to do that is by asking you a few questions around about trying to understand what the local fire risks are. This is a multiple choice question, so answer as many of these that you think that could potentially be a risk in your locality of Lavers Hill. What is it about your neighbourhood that make it particularly vulnerable and not a nice place to be in the event of a bad fire day? Might just give you a couple more minutes there. Fantastic. I'm going to end the polling now. Thank you for taking part in this one. I'm going to share those results with you. And as you can see, by far, there's a couple of really strong answers there, and I would agree totally with you. You know, as we try and outthink fire and fire behaviour, we need to know that narrow, windy roads are a potential. Oh, sorry, Joy, I closed it a bit too early. I'll give you a bit more time next time. Sorry. Okay, so narrow, windy roads are a clear example of poor access and egress or exit. You know, trees hanging over access. You know, once the embers arrive into those trees, there's a potential for limbs to come down, blocking those essential access and exit routes. Yes, you are mildly at a high tourist area in summer, and I would probably say actually you're quite a busy tourist area in summer. The speed of grass fires, we've already spoken about grass fires and how rapidly they actually can traverse a distance and get to your front door. And we often say that if there's fuel to your door, you will have fire to your door. So the idea there is to try and mitigate that risk in some way, and we'll talk about that very shortly. You know, the idea of having some kind of break between the continuity of fuel, so having a driveway, a gravel driveway, an area of cleared land, so the fire doesn't actually get to your doorstep. We talk about embers, and I'm going to be showing you a rather graphic animation very shortly. And I make no apologies for this. It's designed to give you a real feeling of the very nature of fire, and of course, high fuel load. I'm going to stop sharing those results. Thank you for everyone that responded. And next time, Joel, I'll just give you a couple more seconds. My apologies for that. And of course, if you can just cross out with your poll as well. Now, the next slide gives you some element of the resources at hand. The Lavers Hill Brigade are an excellent group of firefighters that work tremendously hard 24/7. At their disposal, they have 3 elements of resource, which includes 1 tanker, 1 ultralight, and 1 slip-on. Now, we ask rather a rhetorical question here to give you an idea of just how viable would it be for those services to be available at your home. You know, you are one of 78 people who live in the Lavers Hill area, spread in 54 properties. The rhetorical question is, well, how realistic would it be to see a tanker and a CFA crew on your drive, at your home, on your farm, on the event of a bad fire day? Bearing in mind that the service might also be pulled in other directions to other areas, other neighbouring areas, assisting other brigades, because that's the very nature of emergency service work. And I might just leave that hanging there while we go on to the next slide. As I say, feel free to offer any comments in the chat function. So, what to expect from a fire? We all know by far that Victoria's had a lot of fires. Last summer we saw huge fires in multiple parts of the state. I'm going to show you an animation now. Okay, it's a very graphic animation. If in any way you are sensitive to this kind of stuff, or if any way it alarms you, please feel free to look away and then join us at the end of the animation. The animation runs for about a minute and a half, maybe 2 minutes or so. When the sound finishes, you'll know that the animation is finished. So I'm going to share the animation now with you. As I say, this is entitled Ember, or an Ember attack, and it gives a description of what to expect in the event of embers. You know how we spoke about them? They can lodge in these trees, they can be ember traps. Well, this is the nature of embers. So enjoy.
During a bushfire, embers will reach your home long before the flames do. Ember attacks are the most common way that houses catch fire. Embers are burning leaves, twigs, and pieces of bark. They help the bushfire spread by starting spot fires ahead of the main fire front. Short-distance ember attacks happen when leaves and small pieces of bark are blown from burning trees. The intense shower of sparks that forms fills the air with hot, burning embers, which will land on nearby vegetation and properties. The hot embers can easily land and get into your clothes and burn your skin, eyes, and airways. Small fires will start all around you and quickly become uncontrollable. The resulting chaos creates confusion as the fire seems to come from many directions, meaning it will be difficult to make good decisions about your safety. The experience will be physically exhausting and emotionally traumatic. Long-distance ember attack is caused by large bushfires that generate intense heat. As the hot air rises, it forms a column of smoke that sucks in air like a vacuum, increasing the intensity of the fire. The updraft in the column lifts embers, like large pieces of burning ribbon bark, hundreds of metres into the air, where strong winds can carry them many kilometres beyond the fire front. On Black Saturday, embers travelled more than 30 kilometres ahead of the main fire. When these embers land, they often start fires where leaves naturally accumulate, like in gutters, doorways, and garden beds. So while you might think you're safe when a bushfire is far away, embers can fall from the sky and land around your home long before you even know there's a fire. But remember, your home isn't the only thing under threat during an ember attack. By the time you realise the danger, it might be too late as escape routes become jammed. Embers can also start fires on roads and block them completely, making late evacuation dangerous or impossible. That's why leaving early, before a fire starts, is always your safest option.
Do you know, that gets me every time. I've watched that many times in the course of doing these presentations to community members. I've got a healthcare background, and in a lot of the work that's involved in healthcare, it's all about the shock factor. It's all about giving people a real taste of exactly what disease looks like. And this is no different. This educational or informational video that you just saw is very real, and it's very graphic, and it's very true in its content. Embers are, the precursor to the fire, that they arrive on your doorstep before the flames arrive. And they're your indicator that something's not right. The next slide will show you that, by far, ember attack is the biggest cause of property loss during a fire. So the way to really understand the imminent danger that you are in from fire is by this graphic approach to the very nature of fire. Embers are a key part of fire behaviour and the devastation that fire can cause in our communities, in our homes, in our places of work. The best place to be is away from that. And I'll keep coming back to my risk mitigation, being out of harm's way. Knowing that fire is as indiscriminate as this should give you enough drive to be out of harm's way. The moment you realize that things aren't right, you need to be gone, and this is what the CFA advocate. The closing statement there was to be out of harm's way, to leave early. I'm now going to show you another presentation, and again, this is rather graphic in its depiction of the nature of radiant heat. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a second while I locate the animation for you. And what I want to do here is just for you to understand that sometimes you really have to take command of the situation and have a fire plan that allows you to leave early. And again, if you feel in any way sensitive to this kind of content, please look away and then join us at the end of this 1 to 2 minute animation. Radiant heat.
Victoria is one of the most bushfire-prone parts of the world. Every summer, bushfires threaten properties and lives. But did you know it's not the flames that kill most bushfire victims? No, it's the radiant heat. Most victims die from the effects of radiant heat long before they're reached by the flames. Radiant heat is what you feel when you sit next to a campfire. If a campfire heats up to 2 kilowatts per square metre, you'll feel that it's too hot and will want to move back from the fire. If you don't, this amount of radiant heat is enough to cause burns and blisters in as little as 40 seconds. At 12 kilowatts, it can cause some materials like dry timber to ignite. A bushfire can reach 100 kilowatts, and the effects can be truly catastrophic. For humans, radiant heat can cause burns from 100 meters away and cause a dangerous increase in body temperature. Radiant heat can cause the rapid onset of heat stroke. Heat stroke damages your brain, meaning you won't be able to concentrate to make good decisions as the fire arrives. Other impacts include severe damage of internal organs and death. There are some things you can do if you're caught in a fire. Cover your skin with long-sleeved natural fibre clothing, like wool. It's also useful to know that radiant heat only travels in straight lines and can't bend around corners. So, sheltering behind or inside solid structures may help protect you. But be aware, radiant heat will travel straight through glass. The best defense against radiant heat is a simple one. If you're not anywhere near a bushfire, its radiant heat can't hurt you. Leaving early is always your safest option.
So as we progress through this presentation, you know, we're peeling back the layers of fire so that you understand that, okay, there's some elements of fire that are totally unbearable. Fire is a force of nature. It's uncontrollable. It's unpredictable, as we've already said. You know, we cannot, with the best tools in the world, totally be able to predict fire behavior. And that's why the Country Fire Authority are constantly bombarding the same messaging, which is leave and leave early. Put your fire plan into practice and be gone. Leave well in advance of the fire. It is the biggest killer. Radiant heat, it's invisible. You can't even see it. It gets you way before the flames ever appear. And another point that I'd like to make is that we spoke about ember attack prior to this slide. Another factor, and I touched on it very slightly at the introduction, was direct flame damage. You know, the fact that if we have dry fuel on your property, which allows a running grass fire to continue on its path, it's a bad thing. So we need to break that line of fuel. I do a lot of work in the Property Advice Visit Service. It's a community door knocking service, or PAVS service. And we door knock areas, particularly vulnerable areas, those areas that are identified as high fire risk, generally on the urban rural interface, and particularly north directing, where we know that the fire is more likely to come from. And we advise our community residents to maintain their properties to a certain order, a certain standard, such that it will mitigate the risk of fire. If firefighters can buy a few minutes here and there when a property can be a place of refuge or shelter, then that's a good thing. So we encourage our community residents to try and maintain their property, limiting that continuity of fuel, having a green belt around their homes, for example, having that gravel drive, having their spouting clear and no dry fuel loads near to the home, having their gas cylinders with the valves facing away from the home in the event of a bad fire day. What I'm going to do now is share, when we talk about fire, particularly, we need to be mindful of a couple of things. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a second. There's a lot of emotion attached to fire. That's the number one thing. So if I stop sharing this screen now, and I'm going to just find some testimonials, because nothing works stronger when we talk about emotional intelligence than hearing it directly from people that have been impacted by fire. So I'm going to reshare this new animation with you. And this, again, are genuine accounts from persons that have been impacted by fire.
Ten years ago, when all the dams were full and the tanks were full and there was plenty of water, I probably would have stayed and I would have died.
Nothing went the way we might have anticipated.
Whatever preparations you put into place, you only need something small to go wrong.
You know, in future, I don't think we'd want to put the kids through that sort of trauma, I guess. Yeah, wouldn't put the kids through that again.
If it was my choice, I wouldn't stay again. If we had another day like that, if I had the opportunity to get out, I would go before the fire even got here.
Before the fire even got here. That's the closing remark from that gentleman. On your screen now, you can see some verbal written testimonials from members of the community that were caught in fire. And I think their statements speak volumes. And coupled with the animation that I've just shown you about the spoken word, the lived experience, we're gathering more momentum as we try and give you the picture or encourage you to try and think hard about leaving and leaving early. It's a no-brainer as far as the CFA are concerned. Okay, moving on as we move to the next stage. What does this all mean to you? Yeah, I'm hoping that in some way we've been able to paint a picture, peel back those layers so that you get a deeper understanding of the nature of fire. Fire is a dark place. It's a very noisy space. It's a disorientating space. And as a consequence, it can be very stressful and traumatic. You need to have a plan for what you're going to do. Why burden yourself with all that extra level of stress when you can have a plan, stick to that plan, and be out of harm's way? We've already said that, ember attack could cause limbs to fall, roadside burns to happen, whereby exit roads may be blocked. Exit and entry. The biggest players here are ember attack and radiant heat. They are your killers. They are the biggest destroyers of property and life. Your ability to make good decisions will be impacted by many factors. Now, I'm going to launch another poll just to get your viewpoint on what you would expect from a fire. What is it that you think would impact on your ability to make good decisions? Again, this is a multiple choice poll. I've just launched it now. Tick as many or as few of those as you like to give me some idea of some of the factors that you think will impact on your ability to make good decisions. And I'll give you a bit of extra time so everyone gets a chance to respond appropriately. Fantastic. I hope everyone's answered. So I'm going to close the poll and share those results with you. Yeah, look, by far, 100% in all regards there. As human beings, we don't manage stress very well. Some of us manage it better than others, but on the whole, the majority of mankind is impacted by stress, okay? Stress is a cognitive function, your ability to cope, okay? Now, what compounds stress, what makes it worse is when you know that you're not ready for what's happening, okay? When you know that you haven't got a game plan, when you know that this is alien territory, you've never been here before, what's going on? Things aren't going to plan. Things are rapidly changing around you. You don't know why and how to respond. And the big player when it comes to stress and your stress burden is time. No one likes to race against time to find a solution. It's extremely stressful. And when it's a life and death situation, it's all the more impactful. Communication breakdown. This can compound stress as well. This is what we call you're not planning ahead, not knowing where the children are. Are they still at school? Who's looking after Auntie Jo 3 doors down the track and her five dogs? Who's looking after the animals? Is John still on the farm on the tractor? Where is your communication plan? How do you know where everyone is at in the event of a bad fire day? And this is a perfect segue to the next part of the presentation. So I'll stop sharing the results there and end that poll. As we move on to the next slide, it gives you, we want to just take it to the next level now, so which is the communication thread. How do you know if there is a fire? So you tell me, open up the chat function, offer your comments as well. How do you know if there's a fire in your area? Where do you go? What's your information source? So how do you know if there's a fire in your area? Oh, top answer for man, CFA app, ABC Radio, Joy, fantastic. I think, look, from the demographic data that I had at the beginning to say that some of you have very low to medium knowledge around fire, these are the basic ones that we always want you to know about, which is the CFA app and the ABC Radio. So thank you for that, and we'll talk about those very shortly. I'd like to spend a couple of minutes just talking about the fire danger rating, the FDR. Many of us will see this finally on the television sometimes, it's on social media, and of course, the majority of us will have seen it on the roadside, usually but not always near a CFA shed or CFA station. But what actually is it? Well, what does it mean? And there's a bit of confusion surrounding this. So I'm just going to launch a poll to gauge your understanding of what the FDR actually is. What does it actually mean? So I'm launching the poll now. And what I'd like you to do is give me your understanding of the FDR. And there's a further 2 questions below that as part of this poll, which asks anyone, do you know how many code red days have happened in the Southwest region in the last 5 years? And also, does anyone know how many severe or extreme days have happened in the Southwest region? And look, and if you're not familiar with code red and you're not familiar with severe or extreme, I'm about to explain that to you. So again, I don't know who's answering what here, so don't be afraid to have a go. We're unpacking our level of understanding and also gaining knowledge as we go. So feel free to have a go. Let's see. I'll give you another couple of minutes there. Oh, a couple of seconds, I think. Yep. So I'll give you another 10 seconds. Lovely. Okay, I'm going to end the poll now for everyone. I hope everyone's had a go. Thank you for your efforts, and we'll share the results. Lovely. So this presentation is about learning, okay? So we're now going to learn that the fire danger rating is an indicator of how likely a fire will start. No, it's actually an indicator of how bad a fire would be if one was to start, okay? It's like, how hard would it be to put that fire out? So at the lower end of the spectrum, it would be relatively easy to put the fire out. But as we progress further to the right, it becomes more and more difficult, and more about that very shortly. So response for number 1 is the second one, which is it's an indicator. The FDR is an indicator of how bad a fire would be if one were to start. So great learnings for the 50% of us there. Does anyone know how many code red days? In actual fact, there have been no code red days in the Southwest in the last 5 years. That may come as a surprise to some, but there have been none at all. And the final question, in terms of how many extreme or severe days have we had in the Southwest in the last 5 years? Top answer number is 6. And 3/4 if you got that right, so fantastic to you. We've had 6 of these days. So I'm going to stop sharing those results. And again, if you could cross out of your screen as well. The main take-home message from the FDR or fire danger rating is that it doesn't necessarily have to be a severe or an extreme day for it to be a bad fire day. We can have a bad fire day at high or very high. Okay, let me explain what I mean by that. Let's talk about severe for just 1 second. And when we talk about a severe day, okay, next time you hear that, severe means it's going to be, expect a hot day, expect a dry, possibly windy day. If a fire starts on a severe day and takes hold, it may be uncontrollable, maybe. Conversely, extreme, as we move further to the right of our FDR, the extreme. Extreme, expect extremely hot, dry, and windy. And if the fire starts and takes hold on an extreme day, it will be uncontrollable. Not maybe, it will be uncontrollable. As we move further along here and we talk about our code red day, code red days are the worst conditions possible, both for bush and grass fires. And our Australian homes are not designed for code red days. The safest place to be is to be away from these areas on such days. And what we like to say is use the fire danger rating as your trigger, as your guide to know when you are going to leave. Leaving on a severe, extreme, and certainly a code red day is not a good option. To leave early is the best option before a severe day, before an extreme day. If you receive notification that tomorrow is going to be a severe day or an extreme day, leave the day before or leave early in the morning and plan your escape, plan where you're going to go, have that fire plan. Now, there's no need for you to take any notes during this presentation, and I should have mentioned that to you at the onset. All the content that we have here, including this presentation, will be recorded. At the end of the presentation, there will be a resource link that will give you access to a lot of information that you can use to inform yourself about some of the elements that we've spoken about. So the fire plan, there's a template for a fire plan. It takes all the guesswork out of deciding what you're going to do or key elements that you should be considering. It gives you an indicator of the emergency bag, what that should contain, and how it all works. It'll contain information about communication channels, but more about that very shortly. So that gives you some idea of severe, extreme, and code red. Don't wait for it to be severe and extreme. Implement your fire plan and leave early. Communication. Now, this is crucial. In modern day world, we live in a world where we are bombarded left, right, and center with information, be it from traditional means of the radio, a newspaper, a conversation with Gladys over the fence while you're putting the washing out, a chat with Joe as you're walking the dog, some conversation that you've overheard in the cafe while you're having coffee. And of course, you've got the digital platforms these days as well, the social media platforms. And some of the icons are instantly recognizable now, the Facebooks, the Twitter, the Snapchat, it's all there. And I refer to this as infobesity, a massive overload of information. All of this information base, the one that you're seeing on your screen at the moment, is what we call informal, not necessarily credible, not necessarily evidence-based, and not necessarily real-time. The point that I would like to make is shown on the next slide, which is these are the recognized means of communication that are real-time, that are evidence-based, that are the go-to in the event of an emergency. And Anne mentioned the CFA app and Joy mentioned the ABC radio. Perfect, 100% correct answers there. They are your formal means of communication. In my role as a PAVS presenter, the Vic Emergency app is our go-to mantra when it comes to communication. It provides real-time information of fire activity, not only in your area, but in neighboring areas or an area that you're going to be traveling to. It has the capacity to be able to set and tailor your route dependent on fire activity behavior. I strongly suggest anyone in our group this morning that doesn't have the Vic Emergency app to have it downloaded onto your smartphone as soon as possible. When we talk about local news, and Joy mentioned ABC radio, this is amazing because, you know, at the end of the day, we're talking about saving lives here, the preservation of life. In the event of a bad fire day, when you are in this dark world, and you may well be trapped in a home, in an area, in a space that's not comfortable, that is dark and disorientating, the one thing that will happen in this situation is that our local communication channels will go down. There will not be any ability to make phone calls, etc. Your only means of communication will be a battery-operated radio. And we make this as an essential component of your emergency kit, and more about that shortly. The reason that we have a battery-operated radio in our emergency bag or having access to is so that we can tune into local news, ABC radio, have an emergency channel that will give you clear, concise information of what's happening in the world outside, your link to the outside. It'll tell you about emergency services, what's happening, which roads are blocked, and where you can get exit or when help is going to be at hand. It's a lifesaver, and I can't stress it enough. I'm going to spend a bit of time now in the next couple of slides talking about other elements of the Vic Emergency app, and more particularly the triage of messaging that comes through, that's recognized and been around and standardized, that allows you to understand and in some way use to do your behavior, to monitor your fire plan. What are you going to do? What are the warning signs? When am I going to leave? So the triage consists of 3 warnings in the first instance, which are advice, watch and act, and the emergency warning. The advice warning by its very nature is advice. There's something going on. This is for your information. Don't be too alarmed. Just keep an eye out for it. Monitor the conditions. This advice warning can also be used as a notification that activity in the area has now subsided and there's no longer a threat to you. So that's your first stage. The second stage of this triage is the watch and act. And again, plain English, watch and act. Look, there is something going on. An emergency is developing nearby to you. You may or you do need to take action. Take action now to protect yourself and others. So let's act. Let's act on that watch and act. And many of you may use this as your trigger to leave and implement your fire plan. The moment the watch and act comes up, implement your fire plan. Some of you, and we would strongly suggest, at the advice stage, the moment the advice warning comes up, you sense something's not right, implement your fire plan. The emergency warning, red, danger, big exclamation marks. Again, self-explanatory. You are in imminent danger. You need to take action immediately. You will be impacted. And it can't be more clearer than that, the emergency warning. As the bottom of this particular slide shows, do not wait for a warning. Do not wait for the advice. Do not wait for the watch and act. And certainly don't wait for the emergency warning. Leave early. That's what we advocate. The CFA are passionate about you leaving early. You can always come back to your home. The wind may change the direction of the fire. It may not come your way. But hey, is it worth the risk? Be gone and be gone early. We talk about evacuation. An evacuation message will also come up on your Vic Emergency app or on the CFA internet site. And it's coded in this black color. Evacuation means just that. The evacuation is recommended or procedures are in place to evacuate. Another component of the Vic Emergency app and also the CFA internet site is community information. This generally happens as a notification that an incident has occurred, but there is no further threat to community. This might come by way of a community newsletter, and it contains updates for the community that's been impacted by the fire. So look, there's a lot to take in there, but one way that I want to try and bring this all together in a real life situation is by going through the following scenario. And again, feel free to interject, offer comments on the chat function if you feel necessary. This is a scenario. A fire starts. And this fire at this stage is some maybe 18 minutes from your home. You're at home. You've got the blinds drawn. You've got the air conditioning on. It's a relatively warm day. And you're oblivious to what's going on down the road, 80 minutes away. The fire is reported probably about 5 minutes down the track. It's reported to 000, and this is the point at which the CFA will receive notification that there's a fire in your patch. Some 10 minutes later, as a consequence of the various climate elements, whether there's a high fuel load, whether there's a strong wind, the fire has grown in intensity and has moved even closer to your home. Again, you're still quite oblivious to this. An advice message is released. About 12 minutes, 30 minutes afterwards. So can you understand what's happened here then? The first part of the emergency warning process has been activated with the advice message released at this stage. This house here in the middle is going to be impacted very soon. In actual fact, the fire will pass through that home, it will consume that home, and in 20 minutes after the fire first started, it's now grown more in intensity and progressing further down. And maybe homes further down will have more warning to implement their fire plan. An updated emergency warning. Can you see how we've jumped from an advice warning to an emergency warning without going through the watch and act? The fire will continue to grow. It will continue to grow in intensity. And in 30 minutes time, it's a lot bigger than it was 30 minutes prior. The moral and the underlying message behind this animation is that you might be ahead of the warnings, but you might not as well. In this particular instance, this house was impacted because their response time was severely limited by the advice message being released so close to them. They probably didn't have time to implement their action. So the reason that I show this is because many of us can get caught out like this. And that's why the CFA would like to say to you that it's about empowerment. We've spoken about the resources of fire, the limitations of our local brigades. We need to take ownership of fire. We need to take ownership of the emergency situation. And when we use our senses, we are trying to empower ourselves to a better knowledge of our environment. A lot of us that are from rural environments understand the land on which we work, on which we live. We can understand when the sky is not the right color. We can understand intuitively when something is not quite right. And that old adage that if it doesn't feel right, it's probably not right. Using your vision to assess the skyline, the horizon. Is there smoke on the horizon? Can you see smoke? Can you see ember or ash in your locality? Can you hear fire? Are you near a woody plantation or some woodland, as was mentioned earlier? That's kind of typical of the Lavers Hill area. Can you hear limbs falling or the crackle of fire or big limbs come thudding down? And most importantly, can you smell fire? Smoke travels a long way and can be smelt from a long way away. Up until now, we've spoken about the FDR, the fire danger ratings, and how we can use that as our tool to understand fire behaviour and fire action. Remember, it's the fire danger rating is an indicator of how hard it would be to put that fire out if it did start. We can use that together with our Vic Emergency app and the triage of warnings to assess, well, what's going to be the trigger for us to leave our homes, to grab our possessions, our emergency bag, implement a plan that takes into consideration our families, our neighbours, our communities. And remember how I spoke about that cohesive community nature? Well, this is when it all comes into its own. We need to look out for each other. And Lavers Hill is no different to other small rural communities where there is a strong, collective, cohesive nature. Look out for each other, implement your fire plan, and leave early. We're going to go on to almost the final. We're about 2/3 of the way through the presentation. Now, thank you for your patience. And again, for the comments that you're making as we progress through this presentation. But what I'd like to do now is take you through a scenario that brings together, as in real life as possible, a scenario that brings together the many elements that we've already spoken about. So some of us learn more effectively this way. So this is kind of a bit of a role-playing exercise that I'm going to go through with you. There's no active involvement on your part other than to listen and take in some of the key messages that we're going to be delivering. So the scenario starts as such. And this is a hypothetical. This is just made up, okay? However, we've tried to make it as real as possible. It's 8 a.m. on a Wednesday morning. When you look outside, you can see that it's already hot and windy. And in actual fact, the report for the day is it's going to be a day of extreme fire danger. So you think to yourself, I know what extreme fire danger means because I know all about the fire danger rating. It's going to be hot and it's going to be windy. However, you jump into your car and you shoot off towards Camperdown. Camperdown because you know that you've got an appointment there. You just have to go and do it, and there's no two ways about it. You cancel it a number of times. You have to go. You jump into your car and you're driving along, and you can see small branches falling around you. You can even feel the radiant heat coming through the window or the glass on your car. You get to Camperdown, you do your appointment, and it's all good. And you stop by to get some lunch. It's about lunchtime, and you overhear some people talking about a fire that started very near to Lavers Hill. So, being the smart person that you are, armed with your Vic Emergency app, you jump onto the Vic Emergency app and you find out whereabouts the fire actually is. And you see that it started a short distance from your home. Okay, so you're in Camperdown, the fire's a short distance from your home. What do you do? Well, you decide to jump in your car and you start heading home to make sure that everything's okay. Interestingly, as you get closer to home, you find that the road is blocked by police. You wind down your window and they advise you that it's not safe to go near to your home because the fire's still burning and there's a few trees where the limbs have come down. You will have to find somewhere else to stay until the road is reopened. My question to you in this hypothetical scenario is, what would this actually mean to you? And by way of answering that question, I'd like to launch a poll. The poll is all about planning and decision making. And it asks the rather pertinent questions around, well, what would you normally be doing on an average Wednesday in summer? Would you be at home, work, or on holiday? And casting your mind back to last summer, would you be prepared to spend a few days away from home in an emergency like this? And the third part of this poll is, well, last summer, did you have an emergency bag kit ready with some clothes, important documents, photos, and medicine? Okay. I'll give you a couple more seconds while we just... Okay, I'm going to end the polling there now. Share those results with you. I hope you've all had enough time. Thank you. Right, so we've got a third of people would be at work. No one would be on holiday during that time, and the remaining 2/3 at home. So that's like a 60-30 split, more or less. Interestingly, a lot of you would be prepared to stay away, be prepared to stay away in the event of an emergency like this, and a further third would say, no, there wouldn't be. But more interestingly, and then the split is quite similar right across actually, because a third of you would not have an emergency bag and 2/3 would have an emergency, got that right. Only 1/3 would have an emergency bag ready and the 2/3 would not. Okay, so again, we're learning, and my job as a facilitator or presenter is to plant those seeds of information that allows you to rethink your planning process. Here we've clearly ascertained that it would be beneficial for a few of you to perhaps have an emergency bag ready and have a contingency for somewhere to stay. So some good learning there, and I thank you for your feedback. I'm going to stop sharing the results there, end that poll, and if you could close out to yours as well. What I'm going to do now is we're going to move on to another hypothetical, and this time it's going to be another hypothetical relating to this situation again, and we're going to take it to the next level, okay? Again, bringing together all those components that we understand. The fire danger rating, it's an extreme day, the radiant heat. Okay, same day, except this time, when you jump onto your Vic Emergency app, you see that the fire is still a while away. So there you are, you've got your Vic Emergency app, you're looking at that yellow triangle, it's still a while away. It doesn't quite reach your home, and you think to yourself, well, I've got enough time to run home and grab some important stuff. So you drive home. As you get out of the car on your driveway, you can smell smoke. So you cognitively, using all your senses, you can naturally smell smoke. And don't forget, it's an extreme day, so it's still really hot and still very, very windy. You check the app again and you see the little yellow triangle on your screen is still an advice message. It's yellow, it's an advice message. Information only. There's something going on, but hey, don't be alarmed just yet. Just monitor. You think to yourself, you should have enough time. You check the app again and you see the little triangle, okay, is still yellow. You frantically move around the house, grabbing all that important gear that you think that you need, which is sort of, you know, your passport, your birth certificate, your insurance documents, the medication that you're on that the GP just recently put you on, your inhaler because you have breathing difficulties. And don't forget the cat food and the cage for the cat. And the kids will need their asthma medicines as well. So you're frantically grabbing all this stuff, going through this checklist in your brain, running back to the car every now and again. And when you go into the drive, you again check your app to make sure that it's all okay. See whether you've been told to evacuate. Nothing at all. You think you've still got time, don't you? The warning is not there. You think you've still got time. You're running through this checklist again as you go through. And this is taking a lot longer than you thought. Do you see how your stress burden is climbing and climbing? And we spoke about some of those elements of human behavior. When we're in a situation like this, we panic and we forget things. Then you take notice as you're running out, there's smoke coming out from that pile of leaves that you were meaning to rake up from last weekend. There's embers falling around you, creating small sort of bits of smoke and fire. As is the case in a situation like this with heightened emotion, heightened adrenaline, you feel that surge of adrenaline rush through your body. You're out of time. In this situation, and just by way of the chat function, if you could just let me know, what is the one thing that you could have done differently to perhaps not be in this situation, to perhaps have a better level of preparedness? So here you are, you've gone home and you're caught, aren't you? And the interesting thing here is, when you leave the house, when you've got all your stuff, which way do you go? Is the road going to be clear? Are you going to turn left or right at the bottom of the road? What's the visibility going to be like? Are you going to stay at home and use the small hose pipe you've got to put out those sort of spot fires that are happening around you in all the different spots? What's happened to the children? What about the horses in the paddock, the sheep, the cattle? Frances, 4 doors down, who needs your help because she's in a wheelchair. What is this about the vulnerable members of the community? And that's probably the top answer there, Anne. Carry the important things with you so you don't need to return home in the first place. And this is the P word, preparation. I'm an ex-Cub Scout, and I know The one mantra that they constantly drove into us was all about preparation is the key. If you knew that it was going to be an extreme day, your preparation, your trigger would have been, right, I know I've got to go into Camperdown for this activity, but I'm going to take my emergency bag with me. I'm going to make sure that my neighbours are all okay and they're all taken care of. I'll make sure that the children know what to do because they're at school at the moment. Preparation is the key. And that amount of stress load on us at times of pressure is not good. It often causes fatalities, as was the case with the Black Saturday fires. People that are not prepared and do not have a fire plan and leave it too late often become the statistics in situations like this. It's not easy to talk about, I fully acknowledge that, but that's the reality. We need to have plans in place that allow us to survive. Leaving early and leaving well in advance of advice warnings, well in advance of the fire danger ratings. When we get a sense that things aren't right, we need to move. We need to move out of harm's way. We can always come back. Do you know, you might think I'm bombarding you with lots of questions in this regard. And you know, the interesting thing is that this is just a hypothetical situation. It isn't even real life. So can you imagine the amount of agitation that you would be going through, the stress burden, if this was actually a real life situation? The closing comments as we come towards the end of this presentation is all about planning and planning ahead. It's about having that Vic Emergency Act, which I can't stipulate enough. As the CFA, we are in a position to offer you bushfire planning workshops, and again, the resource details will be given to you at the end through the resource pack. Planning ahead, being prepared. So some of the listeners today have only been in the township for 1 or 2 years. This may well be all very new information to you, but fire is a very clear and present danger in our communities, particularly in lovely places like Lavers Hill, where there's a lot of scenic and natural beauty. But don't doubt the indiscriminate nature of fire. Fire can start anywhere and be wholly destructive. I have to make a mention to COVID-19. We are still in the grips of this pandemic. Yes, you can still leave early in the event of a bad fire day, and you may leave a high-risk fire day on a bad fire day so that you can continue isolation or self-isolation if you're already in isolation, but allow the inhabitants of the next place where you're staying be aware of that and continue your COVID safe plan. So maintain that isolation factor. And then the other factor is you may travel for the purpose of preparing your property for the fire season. Survival options if your plan fails, and this is fundamental because even the best laid plans can fail. Covering up. The radiant heat presentation made comment to all of the factors that you see on the slide ahead of you. Cover as many parts of your exposed body as you possibly can. Radiant heat is immensely dangerous, as the animation showed. It would be a great idea if these items of clothing were contained in your emergency bag, just in case you don't get a chance to have them on in the event of a bad fire day. Have them in that bag, because at some point you may be able to get changed into them, and this could potentially save your life. We also have protection from radiant heat, and that's the nature of sheltering behind or inside solid objects, and they will provide you a form of protection. Don't forget, radiant heat will travel in straight lines and it will travel through glass. So be away from glass areas. Glass may break and shatter and cause extensive damage to you. sheltering in water. Sheltering in water courses like rivers, dams, and swimming pool, if you have to, could be your lifesaver. But of course, you don't want to be in this situation because you want to be gone, and you don't want to subject yourself to this intense amount of personal stress and also, I guess, threat of fire damage. Excuse me. We've highlighted the stationary car there. Stationary cars or cars are just designed to get you from A to B. They are not designed to be places of refuge when it comes to fire. In fact, I can't imagine a worse place to be in than a car. However, the CFA do recognise that in the event of an emergency, it may be your only option. If this is the case, a stationary vehicle can be used. Make sure the vehicle is away from a main road or a path, is actually on burnt fuel preferably, or an area of cleared gravel, so there's no fuel load nearby, away from overhanging power lines. If possible, position the vehicle facing the fire front. The engine block will allow you to have a bit more protection from the intense radiant heat. When inside the vehicle, crouch down below the window level with a blanket. Cover yourself with a dry woolen blanket. Have water for hydration, which is absolutely crucial. Keep the lights on. Make sure that you monitor the conditions around you by just peering out every now and again. Remove yourself from the vehicle once the fire front has passed, or change direction and seek refuge elsewhere and monitor. As we approach the end of our presentation, I'd like to make mention to the Bushfield Neighbourhood Safer Place. When we talk about bushfire neighbourhood safer place or neighbourhood safer places, these are designed as a last resort, and they are very much a last resort. Don't expect 5-star accommodation or hot drinks or anything like that. It's a last resort. You should not be in the situation of having to go to a bushfire place of last resort. You will have implemented your fire plan early and be out of that fire danger area. If it's such that you have no choice but to get to a bushfire place of last resort, there are a couple located. Actually, there's one located near to Lavers Creek, Lavers Hill, which is within about 18 kilometers away, which is the gravel area next to the Beachy Hotel. And some of you may well be familiar with that. The Beachy Hotel is the location. That's the gravel area next to the Beachy Hotel. 18 kilometers away is your nearest bushfire neighborhood safer place. It's denoted by the green sign and the emoji of people on there. It won't be comfortable, as I've said, but it will offer you some form of protection from the radiant heat. It'll have minimum fuel load, and it'll be a safest spot that you can be in as a last resort. I often show this image as we come towards the end of the presentation to give you some idea of the very graphic and horrible nature of this force of Mother Nature. Fuel will burn, fire will burn all fuel in its path, driven by wind. You will get smoke plumes. You will have intense radiant heat, and the grass fires will move very rapidly, particularly during this La Nina weather pattern that we're currently experiencing. These are some of the resources that can be downloaded at the end. Your guide to survival, the PAV service, which is your guide to property preparation, and again, that the information to know more about that is there also. As I mentioned earlier, the bushfire planning workshop, the Vic Emergency app, and of course, connecting with your local brigade and community. And I know that the Lavers Hill community, particularly with Erica Nash as your the CFA captain, are very passionate about keeping the community safe. They are a hardworking bunch of firefighters, but again, connect with your fire captain of the local brigade and share your concerns, understand more about the very nature of fire. If nothing else, my job this morning has been to give you an entry-level understanding of the indiscriminate nature of this force of Mother Nature. Fire is a very clear and present danger. We live in a beautiful part of the world, but along with that comes the everyday threat of fire, particularly during our fire season. Be prepared, have a plan, look out for each other, look after your communities, and stay safe. They are the key messages. I know that some of the animations and some of the descriptors that we've used in this presentation may upset you emotionally. If you have in any way been impacted, there are a couple of helplines that you may want to connect to for further support. If there's any final comments before I launch our final poll, I would be most grateful to please offer your comments in the chat function. Now, this is the final poll. And the final poll just consists of 2 questions. I'm going to launch the poll now. And the 2 questions are, did you find this meeting gave you a better understanding of bushfire risk in your local area? And also, would you recommend it to other members of the community or other members in other areas that live in fire-prone areas? I'll just give you a couple of minutes to answer that. I'm glad to see that we're finishing just on time, which is beautiful. I'm going to end the polling if everyone's answered. Thank you. I'll share those results with you. Yeah. So I'm glad that you would recommend it 100% to other members in certain similar areas. And yes, we had and thank you for those that appreciate that this gave them a good understanding of bushfire behaviour. And in that respect, we can never stop learning. And again, the resources will be valuable to add to your knowledge base now. And of course, confirming what you already know. Thank you very much for your attendance this morning. I appreciate your time. I'm going to stop sharing the results and close out of there. My name is Raj. If you have any questions, I can be contacted through Erica. Please feel free to offer any comments. Thank you very much for your time and patience this morning. I'm glad to understand that this has been a valuable presentation for you. Stay safe and look out for each other. Thank you.